was always fascinated by human behavior, and I was really interested in the motivations and the intentions that were beneath the things that people did. And that coupled with just wanting to do something about the suffering that I saw around me. I grew up in a home that was kind of challenging, that my mom was very anxious. My dad was pretty punitive, and it was a divorce situation. And so it probably came from getting through a situation like that and wanting to make a difference for others who might be struggling with similar things. Sure, I loved working at and creating OCDI Junior. At the time, I was a tenured professor at Suffolk University, and I did lots of research on parenting, and I mentored many, many students. And I really loved that part of my work, mentoring and training and working with and consulting with clinicians. But I didn't really have too many opportunities to work with OCD and anxiety. And I had been talking with McLean about whether or not they wanted to start a program for children and adolescents similar to the original OCDI. And lo and behold, they did, and they hired me to do it. And it was really terrifying. I thought, what did I just say yes to? So I actually gave up my tenured position. A lot of people said, "You're crazy." And maybe I was, but still, it was so important to me to see if I could make something that could make a difference um, for kids and teens with anxiety and OCD. And we designed the whole program. We designed it using evidence-based practices, including exposure and response prevention, primarily with integrated ACT to help with increasing willingness, which we know is a predictor of outcome, as well as using values, right? Helping kids connect with the bigger purpose of facing their fears. And I have to tell you, some of these kids I will never ever forget, and I still hear from them from time to time to hear how they're doing. And I just love that. I love that. That's just such been a wonderful part of my career. Now it's being run by Dr. Maria Freire, who's a fabulous, fabulous clinician and director, who was my postdoc at the time. And there have been many people who have trainees who have passed through that clinic who are really doing great work disseminating evidence-based care for OCD. That started way back on my postdoc, and I remember that. I think people were very curious about it then when I was at the Pediatric Anxiety Research Center with Abby Garcia and Jennifer Freeman. And one of my mentors was the amazing Don Posner my out of track rotation. And with him, I saw lots of clients with anxiety and also, of course, insomnia because we did insomnia, CBT or CBT for insomnia. And we used to get into these arguments all the time about like, well, this is ACT. And he'd say, no, I already do that. And I'm like, yeah, but that's still ACT. And I think that one of the things that I learned through those arguments was how to build bridges across the two traditions, number one. But number two, that at the heart of it, if we really boil down these approaches to behavior and their behavior analytic roots, right? They are not dissimilar at all. They might have different ways and different strategies for teaching and for helping clients come to the realizations that they do, and for helping clients choose to engage in flexible, different behaviors, right? That are more approach-based than avoidance-based. But I really loved learning ACT, and I thought that there's so much heart in it, and it adds a piece to behavior analysis that at the time I thought CBT didn't, which was it adds an individual's private events to the behavior analysis, right? Their thoughts or feelings, and the way that attachment to those can get in the way and prevent and be obstacles, right, of moving forward. And so the more and more I worked with this, it really shaped how we now think about treating OCD. And I don't see the two as separate at all. They're quite integrated. And there's lots of things I could say about this. We still use graduated hierarchies where needed. We still do exposure and response prevention, right? It's just that we also have very specific strategies to help people really be in the exposures when they're doing them so that they can really capitalize on the learning that can come from them. I don't know. All I can say is I'm pretty tenacious and stubborn. And also, I really like to listen to people and learn from them. I'm also very humble, and I feel like I learn a lot of things from my colleagues and my clients. And I think that combining that sort of an approach in conversations with folks who do more directive CBT or ERP has been really helpful, right? ACT also, one of the things that's really helpful is it's an experiential learning model, which just means that we teach by showing clients how to do things. And I do the same in my trainings with clinicians. We show them how things feel and how things work. And when they learn that from the inside out, they're more likely to try it. I think that's important. And then the other thing I think that was probably helpful was I learned CBT first, right? And when I first learned ACT, I was like, I don't even know how this stuff works. This is crazy, right? It's so like emotional. And how do I do this? And yet, when I incorporated small pieces of it into my work, I noticed clients doing these amazing things and making these leaps. And that's what hooked me. And so I started giving myself permission to use little pieces of it and then getting bolder and bolder and bolder and bolder and then seeing things work together. And so now it's been probably over 25 years since I first learned ACT. Um, and it's something that I really love, and I hope that continues to be used in the field. I know that there are over 1,000 randomized clinical trials of varying quality with every, scientific endeavor. There's always varying quality, but lots of them supporting the robustness of ACT and the comparability with other evidence-based approaches. So I look forward to seeing how it develops as we move it into more and more process-based work, more and more principles-based work, where we really unite sort of what we do across these traditions in terms of their basic principles. And we can develop a framework that's more comprehensive in understanding how treatment works. Yes, oh my gosh, there have been so many. And I think like many women, just the balancing of having a family, raising children, and having an academic career. But I would say that one of the bigger ones was, and the first time I really struggled was during the pandemic, when I think like everybody else, I was trying very hard to do a lot, to use everything I could, every skill I had to sort of put myself out there to do webinars and write things and be helpful and take extra clients. And I remember what it felt like going sort of from the bed to the computer to the bed, and like that sort of path that we all burned during the pandemic. And for the very first time in my whole career, I would wake up and think, oh, I have to do my job today. And that was new. I'd never felt that before because I really love my work. And at that point, I realized, oh my goodness, I need to ask for help. And so I asked a colleague to find somebody who was a brilliant, brilliant clinician who helped me basically come back to my work with love and take better care of myself and take better or set better boundaries with the amount of work I was doing, and to notice that it's okay to take care of oneself and also help others. Not that you have to do one exclusively. So it was extremely humbling. And again, I think those sorts of experiences are actually incredibly useful for clinicians to have, because it helps us really know what is it like when we have people who come to us in pain, feeling burned out, feeling depressed or anxious, right? And they want our support. And we would want them to ask for help. And I noticed how hard it was for me to ask for help. And so I just want to put that out there for anybody, especially women in the fields who are struggling with trying to balance all of the many things that we have to do. You know, it's okay. And we need you. Wow, that's a great question. And, you know, I think it's changed a lot. It's changed quite a lot. When I was a doctoral student, I'll tell a small story. When I was a doctoral student, I was newly married, and unexpectedly, we got pregnant with my daughter. And in my department where I went, there was a story about a few women who had had pregnancies in grad school. Oh, they were really great students. And then they had babies. And I was really terrified because I wanted both of these things really badly. And I remember walking into the chair's department and telling him, you know, my studies are really important to me. I'm not going to make a show of the baby around the department. And that was an actual sentence I said. And I was young and dumb, but that was the sentence that I said. And a few weeks later, I had Josie, my daughter, who's now 25 years old. She's a fabulous human, one of my very favorites on the planet. And I met Kelly Wilson, who was one of the founders of ACT. And he was very friendly. He was new faculty. And he stopped to chat with me in the hall and he said, "Hey, didn't you just have a baby?" And I said, "Yeah, I did." And he said, "Why don't you ever bring her around the department?" And I said, "Oh, well." And I explained to him the way things were because I thought, well, he doesn't understand and I better kind of educate him. And as I looked up at his face, he was looking sort of like flabbergasted. And I was like, "Oh, what?" And he said, really quietly, leaned in and he said, "Is that the kind of world you want to raise your daughter in? One where she has to hide?" And I was like, oh, just like a knife through the chest. And I said, "No, of course not." And then he leaned in again and he said, "Do you realize you're contributing to that kind of world for her through your choices?" And at this point, I was blubbering and crying, but the point had been made. And it was one conversation that changed everything. And I started bringing her around the department and I nursed everywhere unapologetically. He also said, I forgot this last part, he said, "She's welcome in my lab anytime." And so I brought her to his lab. And do you know what happened? After that, 9 other women got pregnant. Grad students successfully went through the program. Everything changed through one conversation. And to me, I learned that we can be the architects of our world through our choices if we act in small ways to make a space around us and also to support other women. And I think that in our field, we're seeing more and more of that, and it is still needed. And moreover, we need to support, I think our field needs to diversify because we cannot meet the need of the many vulnerable and underserved populations that we have in the United States. That's the next frontier, and we really need to do a better job at that. But that was a very long answer. I hope that's okay. I think it's really important to recognize other women's work and to support them. One of the things that's really important to me now is supporting young female clinicians and my doctoral students the same, anybody who has ever worked for me, to make sure that when I take a person into our clinic, which is the New England Center for OCD and Anxiety, and we have a business in Ireland, we also have businesses in a few states in the Northeast, and we're hoping to expand. It's really important to me to equip them with resources so that they can go out and thrive, that they can disseminate evidence-based care well, that they feel supported and nurtured, that they feel like it's a safe place to learn by trial and error how to be a good clinician, how to be a good scientist, and that they in turn pay that forward and do that for other women that they train. So that's one of the things that I think is really important to keep doing that. Oh my goodness. So many scientists, like when I was a grad student, people like Sheila Iberg, etc. I mean, so many. Emery Albano went to my doctoral program. My colleagues now, Jill Ehrenreich, Alicia Murray, Andrea Cronus, all incredible clinicians. And then my friend group now of women like Robin Walser, Miranda Morris, there's so many, Sean Woolley, um, Raheli, it's just, there's so many people that I could mention who are in my circle now of closest friends who are clinicians and behavioral scientists, who I just admire the work that they do. I admire how they also support other women, in their work as well. And the way that we've created communities around us, to continue growing in the field. I think they have, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure I can say it's causal, right? But what I can tell you is I know that I feel like women are socialized to be good colleagues. And one of the things that I found myself doing to try and be a good citizen, especially in my academic position, was to continue to take more and more administrative responsibilities, because that would mean I was a good colleague and I was a nice person and all this stuff. But ultimately, it got in the way of being more productive research-wise and writing more grants. And if I could look back at that young person now, I would tell her, say no to those jobs and set your boundaries around your research time and protect it. And seek people who are going to support that protection of your research time or your clinical time. I think that that's important. Those are some of the gender dynamics that I see. And it's interesting because I feel like psychology is a field that's dominated by women, and yet we still deal with having lower pay on average than men, etc. And I sometimes feel like women's voices, are not as attended to as they could be. I don't know if that's other women's experience or not, but it's certainly mine. Mm. Support each other. That's number one, is you need communities, because this is really hard to do alone. Um, I wouldn't, I don't know that I would say that these are all leadership qualities that I think are unique to women, but I think they're unique to leaders. I think that being humble is really important. This is my own philosophy, and learning from the people around you, right? You don't ever want to be or think you are the smartest person in the room. That would be A, wrong, and B, boring, because how would you learn, right? We are so much better than the sum of our parts, right? When we get together. I think staying in contact with what is truly important to you as a person, and I think leading with that with integrity is really, really important, right? So, for example, it's important to me to be of service, right? And I want to make that service more and more accessible. So we're constantly thinking of ways in our clinic, how can we give stuff away? How can we teach? How can we make things more affordable and also keep the lights on? How can we mentor people in maybe underserved areas of the US such that we can support them with the infrastructure of training that we've developed, such that they have the skills that they need to serve folks where they are. So I think having integrity, um, and also acknowledging when you make mistakes, that's really important, right? Like, from the top down, if you want to create it's important to me as a leader to create a culture around me, especially in the place that we work at, that I created, to be nurturing, truly nurturing. And in order to do that, in order to make people safe, to really innovate and really try things and really stretch what they know, has to come from the top down, right? Really has to come from the top down. So those are a few of the qualities. I'm sure I could think of more, but those are some of the main ones. I think ADAA is pretty incredible in how it really helps the our evidence-based interventions come to life through supporting all sorts of webinars and trainings and these wonderful conferences that we go to, where clinicians and researchers can come and learn from each other and observe these skills being practiced, right? I think that that's really important. And in terms of OCD, it's really just in the choices of the types of things that it supports at conferences. Even some of the newer treatments as they're developing, for example, inference-based CBT has gained a lot of interest lately. And to go out there and support presentations on that and to allow them and to allow conversations with the proponents of those approaches to other approaches, I think is really, really important. And so I love the inclusiveness of ADAA and how it does things like that. I think that that's one of the key ways it supports developments in the field, especially around OCD. I guess the last thing that I would say is I am so grateful to the people around me who have supported me in being able to do this work that I love. Um, it's hard, right? It's really hard to keep that work-life balance and get it right all the time. And I think for women especially, and this is probably unique to women, we feel torn in two quite a lot, where you're always disappointing somebody on one side, right? Either somebody at work or someone in your family. And so I'm incredibly grateful to my family for, supporting me in doing this pursuit, which feels so essential, and so essential to who I am as a human and the way I move through the world. And to my professional colleagues who I love and admire, and who pick up the phone when I call them and who ask me for advice and I can go to for advice. I mean, I couldn't do this without my village of women around me who support me as I go.